The last week of October 2025 was an absolute nightmare for Russia, as Putin's so-called 3 days special military operation dragged into its third year. The Kremlin took hit after hit in a single stretch. Pressure that had been building finally crested. For Vladimir Putin, the focus shifted from victory to regime survival. Over those days, 4 blows landed together, sweeping US sanctions that struck at Moscow's oil exports, a fresh wave of casualties at the front, and a public at home that began to feel the war's cost in prices, outages, and fear. The Kremlin won't admit it, but the proof showed up where propaganda has fewer filters. Street interviews captured widespread fatigue as people tried to explain why daily life was getting harder and why no one seemed to help. One exchange captured the mood. "How should I know? Does our government care about us, the pensioners? Of course not. How should I know what it's related to? It's largely due to the war. Everything goes there. All the money goes to the war. And what can be done about it? How to fix the situation? Zelensky needs to be removed, and everything will be fixed." The anger is diffuse and often contradictory, but the shared conclusion is simple. The war eats everything. Late October made that reality visible at night. Across October 24th, 31, the blackout war reached deep inside Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky had warned that if Russia kept striking Ukrainian power plants, Ukraine would make sure Moscow faced a dark winter. After fresh Russian strikes on Ukrainian cities that week, Ukrainian counterstrikes followed. In the last week of October, reported disruptions hit the Moscow region and rippled outward to Lipetsk, Tambov, Belgorod, Bryansk, Tula, Ryazan, Oryol, Kursk, Voronezh, Rostov, and more. The point isn't one city, it's the pattern. For the first time since the full-scale invasion began, Ukraine showed sustained capacity to bring blackout pressure inside Russia, mirroring what Russian missiles had imposed on Ukrainian cities for nearly 3 years. That shift forced choices in Moscow. Russia thickened an air defense ring around the capital, moving systems to protect the political core, and by extension, the leader. In centralized systems, shielding the political center typically comes first. The cost is thinner protection elsewhere and a sense of abandonment in the regions. When Moscow is ring-fenced while provincial grids flicker, the state looks less like a national guardian and more like a fortress. The contradictions surfaced on television, where triumphal messaging collided with domestic need. A broadcast could brag about knocking out Kiev's grid, and then pivot to fundraising for generators in blackout-hit Russian regions, even describing refugees inside Russia. As aired, "We have struck Kyiv. There is no electricity in Kyiv. There is no heat in Kyiv. There is no water in Kyiv." A few moments later, we continue to collect donations for the needs of the Belgrade region for those who are refugees and live in homes in the blackout zone. While that dissonance played out at home, a diplomatic gambit abroad collapsed. The Kremlin had counted on a Budapest moment, a high-profile meeting that might repackage talks without real concessions and buy time. That plan fell apart after a misstep by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, according to the original account. On October 22nd, the United States announced sweeping sanctions targeting Rosneft and Lukoil. The sequence mattered. It undercut Moscow's energy diplomacy, and more importantly, pushed risk onto the intermediaries that make oil trade function. Banks, insurers, shippers, and traders. The market reaction was quick and carried into November. China trimmed purchases, according to early November trade indications. India shifted toward Iraqi and UAE barrels. Turkey lifted its intake of non-Russian crude. Brazil reduced its reliance on Russian diesel. Those four, China first, India second, Turkey third, Brazil fourth, had been Russia's top buyers since 2022. When all four adjust at once, Russian discounts deepen, compliance checks multiply, and logistics slow. Even when a cargo finds a hull, the economics sag under risk premia and workarounds. The numbers showed up fast. Russian authorities reported an estimated 27% year-on-year fall in October oil revenue. Energy officials in Moscow signaled that receipts would keep sliding through the last 2 months of the year. A predictable lag given the October 22nd announcement and the time it takes for sanctions to propagate through contracts, insurance, and freight. A wider deficit means more taxes and quasi-taxes, but household incomes aren't keeping up. In a stagflation pattern, weak growth and high prices, it feels like everything goes up except paychecks. The war bill is the exception. It rises relentlessly. Budget stress rarely produces social spending in authoritarian systems. It produces control. For the first time in years, the FSB publicly advanced a criminal case against exiled opposition figures, alleging plans for violent overthrow. The move signaled concern within the security services. At the same time, the Kremlin has been seizing assets from oligarchs to fund the war, while taxing the public more. Each step risks creating new opponents among elites and the public. When you make adversaries at the top and bottom, the center starts to fray. Elites hedge, bureaucrats stall, security services look over their shoulders. That's the climate where rumors turn into expectations. Cultural signals multiplied. In St. Petersburg, the phrase, "let the swans dance," resurfaced, a metaphor for 1991 style change, a dance of endings. State-aligned broadcasters tried to squash the idea by attacking it on air, and in so doing amplified it to people who might not have heard it at all. Their tirade made the point for them. Now they want to repeat the experience of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Who is the author? Snyder, a professor at Yale University. He came up with the term post-Russia. The second one involves breaking the political regime in such a way that Russia becomes post-Putin. Russia must lose the imperialist war and become democratic as a result of its defeat. The broadcast referred to historian Timothy Snyder. Original on-air wording retained above. Meanwhile, the military track moved in lockstep with the fiscal squeeze. The Kremlin announced its largest conscription in 9 years, 135,000 more young men. The draft calendar changed too. Instead of 2 seasonal intakes, Russia is moving toward year-round call-ups and pressuring conscripts to sign contracts, easing their deployment to the front. Training appears short, logistics uneven, and morale brittle, according to soldier testimonies. Reliable testimony comes from soldiers themselves, recording what censors can't erase. If anyone sees this video, I hope I don't know what to do. The radio broke down. No connection, nothing. There is no food or water, nothing. 5 commandering Ukrainians. So many corpses along the road. Something __ up my leg. Either a drop or an FPV. I don't know. For about a week now, I've been really hungry. There are many, many corpses. The leaves have fallen. Nowhere to hide. I can't see any villages or anything else. There are no berries. There's nothing. Where to run? How to hide? I hope I survive. Those words don't need commentary. They puncture the gap between televised triumph and lived experience. They also expose the core paradox of that week. The more the state tightens control, the more it reveals fragility. Sanctions compress energy cash flows. Blackouts sap legitimacy at home. Buyers diversify. Taxes climb. Mobilization deepens. None of this ends the war on its own, but together, it changes the trend line. Underneath is a simple structure. Russia's wartime model rests on 3 pillars: energy cash flow to fund the budget and procure foreign goods through intermediaries, financial insulation via discounted sales to Asia and a shadow fleet, and manpower from mobilization, calibrated just below the threshold of mass backlash. The last week of October appears to have stressed all 3 at once. Sanctions raised friction and costs across shipping and finance. Key buyers diversified away, which weakens Russia's leverage, even when volumes move. Domestic blackouts pulled resources inward and encouraged the leadership to ring-fence the capital. And manpower needs widened through coercion rather than enthusiasm. It is hard to sustain a long war when you ask for more money from people earning less, and more blood from families receiving less in return. The economic mechanics are unforgiving. When perceived compliance risk rises a little at every stage, contract, insurance, freight, delivery, the seller's netback falls a lot. While single-month data can be revised, longer budget trends are harder to mask. That, more than rhetoric, explains why officials signaled further declines into November and December, and why the tax and repression curve steepened in tandem. The political mechanics are equally simple. People endure everything until they don't. Oligarchs stay loyal until they hedge. Regional elites praise the center until the lights go out and the generators arrive late, When television boasts about darkness in Kyiv while asking viewers to fund heaters for Belgorod, even the faithful may connect actions abroad with consequences at home. They might not say it loudly, but once the thought forms, propaganda competes with reality. And reality has the stronger claim. That is why the last week of October 2025 felt different inside Russia. The markets shifted, the lights dimmed, the numbers moved. But more telling were the voices at street level and the footage from the front. Together they revealed limits of cash flow, of coercion, of narrative control. The immediate question is whether the squeeze forces a pause, or whether the regime doubles down with higher taxes, tighter control, and more men pushed forward. Signals will likely appear first in two places: in insurance quotes and freight routes that decide how Russian barrels sail, and in the rolling blackout maps that decide whose homes stay lit when winter bites.